SDR versus HDR, a scam nobody knows, and today this is episode 4 in this long-going series to see if HDR does what it says it's supposed to do.
But, sir, HDR gives you 10-bit color and the most accurate representation per the director's intent.
Now, for starters, I want to specify a couple different things. First, you have to be full screen to see what I'm going to be showing in this video. And second, I'm doing it this way because you cannot show movies on YouTube. If you do so, you'll be blocked worldwide and the video just won't be visible anyway. So I have to be very careful with how I do that, and with that, we're going to dive right into it. So for starters, in this particular image, SDR looking softer by comparison. It's not necessarily doing a whole lot for, again, visual quality, which is unfortunate. However, it is doing a good job of representing color, and I think that's really the only major benefit here. Because as you look at HDR, HDR is doing a great job of the geometry and contrast that it's providing. It's absolutely exceptional, really. I don't have a complaint about that. The only problem I have with it is that the color is off. Everything else was pretty decent except for the shadow crushing on the trees to the right-hand side of the screen here. And I mean, really, that's just kind of what you're going to notice as a theme throughout this video. Take this image, for example. Everything is basically crushing down, all for the sake of giving you a little extra highlight detail, and it's kind of stupid if you ask me. So while the fluorescent bulbs in the center and the metal elements like the bars hanging above are more shimmery and you can see them clearer, you can notice that John Wick himself, the main character and the focus of the movie, is not represented perfectly. You see, SDR is doing so much more for the color in his face, his shirt, and the different tonalities of all the ambient lighting on that subway, and it's just holding true on every single character around them. Take the guy at the bottom of the screen here. You can see his hair so much cleaner and so much clearer than you can in HDR. HDR has none of the highlight detail. And like this is the stuff that I'm talking about when I say that they're really just marketing bullshit at this point, because how can you possibly tell me that you are giving me a more dynamic range of color when the color is so very off? I mean, look at the shade of green as you see on the subway, the shade of blue, I mean, the different tones. Look at the shadow detail of everybody on the subway. It's becoming very clear that HDR is just a dynamic contrast enhancer remarketed as something more. And it's really disingenuous. When we look at this particular image, it becomes abundantly obvious that that's kind of what's going on here. I mean, check out HDR. Seriously look at the candles to the right-hand side of the screen. All that information is being crushed out compared to its SDR counterpart. SDR is showing every little bit of detail, but then it's going above and beyond that. Look at the floor. The floor is far more colorful. Look at the ambient lighting as the door is cracked and coming through. You can see that light that, again, is supposed to be there, shining on the door, shining on the character. Everything is just better in SDR because SDR has an industry standard and it can be calibrated, where HDR doesn't have that, and it's open to interpretation. And that leads to really poor implementation of color. And honestly, that's what we're seeing here. Now, not to take everything away from HDR, look at this image. This is fantastic. Here we see brick by brick, HDR holding its own against SDR. Literally brick by brick. Every brick looks fantastic. You can see the bars of that metal door that John Wick is holding on to very clearly, though John Wick himself, again, the main focus, not really being taken into consideration here, and all that information is basically crushed out. This is not good, because this means that now you're not going to be experiencing what you paid for, which is, again, that dynamic depth. You want to see the best black level representation along with the best color, and you're just not getting it here. Now, if we look at SDR, SDR is not perfect. SDR is a bit softer by comparison, and you also see John Wick, but there's film grain to go along with that shadow detail, so it's kind of like a pick your poison kind of thing. Personally, though, I would rather see John Wick because he is the main character, and in a dark scene like this, his every move is very important. Now, as we go to a scene like this, it is, again, a total domination for SDR. Look at the glow on the floor. I mean, the colors are bouncing off of the walls, literally looking very nice. Literally look at the statues and how the ambient lighting that is in the museum that is overhead casts down onto, again, these character models. I say character models, but I really mean the statues here, very cleanly, giving you clean shadows and everything like that. The character himself that's standing in the middle, looking very clean. You can see his face, you can see his jacket, you can see everything very cleanly. Where on HDR, it's just dark. And the only real benefit here is that light source underneath the wall there is tighter, but honestly, it's not really worth it because, yeah, you're getting better shadows in some areas, but everything's just dark. So is it really better shadows at this point, or is it you just crushing out information, trying to manipulate the sensory pleasures to make you think that, hey, I'm getting something more than I'm getting? I don't know. Now, in this image, it kind of feels like that because we see that, again, look at SDR. You can see this woman here. You can see her jeans, her boots, her sweater, her hair, her hand very clearly. But not only that, you can see every single person as an individual person, and you can see detail in that person's face and in everything in the environment. You can see the shadow detail, right? And the color to go along with that. Again, HDR, everybody's just crushed out for the sole purpose of drawing out more detail in the building. And I call this just a false image. This is not what the real world looks like. At no point in time when you're outside at night would you be experiencing something so crushed like this that you're not able to see people in a well-lit environment like this. And that's my problem with HDR. It's just a falsified image that's really garbage. It's not what they say it is. And it becomes abundantly clear when you look at how dark everybody is. Now, what I found very funny, though, is when you look at this particular image, you see all the shadow detail. Now, let's just think about that for a second. This is an image where you're in an action movie. You're in this dark crowd setting where John Wick's going to pass through at any moment, and everything that you do in this crowd is very important, and you have to pay close attention. In HDR, you're going to miss whatever happens because everything's crushing out to draw out background detail or whatever is the brightest thing on the screen at a single given point. But in SDR, you're getting everything that you paid for versus HDR. It's a very strange thing that's going on here, and I just honestly, quite frankly, don't recommend that. Check out the violins here. The violins are alive in SDR, and HDR, they're dead. Same can be said about facial tones. I mean, look at the pink in the lady's ears. You can see that very clearly. The pink in her lips, the pink in her cheeks. I don't know if you've ever looked at a woman, but they aren't just some flat grayish color. That's literally like morgue status right there. And that's what HDR gives you. Now, a lot of people will hype this up as being the greatest because you can get tighter contrast like you're seeing around light sources. So look at the light to the far right-hand side of the screen. That is tighter, and that is fantastic. I love that. I wish I could get that in SDR, but I'm not willing to trade that for the sake of my skin tones and overall color paletry. I mean, just look at these two images. It's a day and night difference between SDR knocking the socks off of HDR. But again, people are telling you to upgrade to HDR screens on false merits and bullshit just simply because they don't understand technology. And I think anyone telling you that is a quack, and you should not listen to them because the results speak for themselves. You can actually test this stuff time and time again, and you'd see HDR has better color definitively due to having an actual industry standard and being able to be calibrated, mapped, and everybody having a universal approach to creating SDR content. Where HDR, there is nothing like that, and you just throw your hands up in the air and decide what you want to do with it, and that's not how you make content, especially for screens with standards to them. Look at this image. This is another example of what I'm talking about. Notice how HDR is doing great with reflections, and they're showing light sources, which again, that's the strong point of HDR, honing in on light sources to create more contrast, honing in on shadows and on dark areas to create more contrast, which at that point makes it a dynamic contrast feature, but it doesn't do anything for color. Look at the color in SDR and tell me that that is not just better. You're seeing so much more in the shades. You're seeing so much more in the realism of the shadow detail. I mean, the world just isn't a dark, crushed out, over contrasty mess, and that's what HDR is turning out to be. No matter what you choose, whether it's SDR or HDR, one can obviously see that the two technologies are different. Personally, I feel like if we highlight this issue enough, maybe enough people will catch on, and this issue will maybe get addressed, and we will actually get a cross between the two, which is what HDR was supposed to be from the beginning, which is we get all the color of SDR and all the shadow detail and contrast enhancement benefits of HDR into one final product, which is a high dynamic range capable of 1 billion shades of color. But as it is now, it is just a marketing tool to manipulate the masses because they took away 3D. That's really where we are right now, but I'd love to hear your thoughts. Which did you think looked better and why? Thanks for watching the #1 brand in honesty, and until the next video, I'll see you guys later.